Jason Kenney held a press conference today to announce his party's economic platform. And it was really interesting to me to notice, first of all, how heavily weighted it was towards energy issues, because we were all wondering what role energy would play in the election now that it was called earlier today. And secondly, it was interesting to hear Mr. Kenney talk about the industry and what the industry wanted and the policies that he was going to put in place to stimulate the industry and get it back on its feet. The problem is there is no large monolithic industry per se. What we've got in Alberta is two industries, as I argue in my book, The New Alberta Advantage. On the one hand, and if you look very closely at the graph that's up on the screen now, take a look at the pentanes plus and light and medium production. So the bands on that graph are fairly thin, representing small production, and they don't grow much between 2017 and 2027. They might rise from 400,000 to 500,000 barrels a day. Now take a look at the heavy upgraded bitumen and non-upgraded bitumen bands on that graph. They probably represent today about 3 million or just a little over 3 million barrels a day of production. And by the time we get out to 2037 or 2038, somewhere in there, now we're talking about maybe 4.5 million barrels a day of bitumen production. Now this is really important because what we've got is the oil sands, which is dynamic and growing and has a pretty bright future. And then we have the conventional side of the business that is stagnant and really isn't going anywhere over the next 20 years. But it's really understandable why Mr. Kenney would favor policies that help the small and medium-sized producers on the conventional side. They've been hurting for a long time. They never really recovered from the price downturn of 2015 and 2016. Every nickel of extra compliance cost or tax or whatever it might be really hurts them. They're already bleeding red ink, and so if you add a nickel of cost to a barrel, then that's just more money that they lose. So they really need to get their costs contained, and they don't have the advantages that the oil sands companies have, the Suncor, Cenovus, and CNRL's, Husky, Imperial Oil. Those are all, to one extent or another, integrated companies. They have refineries down in the US or refineries in Canada, and they are much more profitable. So in the third quarter in 2018, for instance, Suncor had net earnings of $1.8 billion. The oil sands company have access to all the capital they need, and they have a plan to ride out the short-term issues around market access. Nobody's happy about that, and their net earnings went down in Q4, but nevertheless, they're much more flexible, much more resilient than the small companies. And so what we've got here is the odd situation of the large oil sands producers who favor Rachel Notley's policies, and the small, the juniors and mid-caps, who favor Jason Kenney's policies. And so when we're talking about issues as we go forward over the next 30 days, it's really important that when we talk about policies for the industry, it's which sector of the industry. Are we talking about the oil sands, or are we talking about conventional? They have very different policy needs, and the two parties have put forward very different policy prescriptions, and one favors Notley and the NDP favor the oil sands, and the Jason Kenney and the UCP favor the conventional. So that, I think, is an important point that should inform our discussion of energy issues during the election campaign.